welcome back to the Inspired Podcast, a podcast made to have conversations centered around being designed by God to discover and dwell. Whatever season in life you're in, you will pick up helpful insight, thoughts to think on throughout the week, and leave this episode feeling inspired to know God in deeper ways. I'm Jessica, and I'm on the Inspired team here at X Church, and I'm joined by my friends Janice and Megan. One of our goals with this podcast is to have meaningful conversations about everyday topics, all filtered through the lens of Jesus. And last week, we took a deep dive into parenting, discussing a lot of different techniques and strategies of parenting in our modern culture. We found that the Bible doesn't have a lot of specific instruction pertaining to parenting, so how do we know what to do? In this continued discussion on parenting, we talk a lot about the practical and the overarching goals and views of parenting. There's tons of wisdom shared in this very episode. And hey, if you're not a parent at the moment, don't turn this off. We've all been parented, so we have a lot to learn from our experience and carrying that with us into the next season of life. And also, Megan shares a hilarious and rather self-deprecating story about a struggle her mom had with her. Listen in. Welcome back. This is part 2 of our parenting episode. Woo woo.
Yeah, we couldn't get done last time.
I know.
There's just so much to talk about.
I know. We were just getting down to the minute and figured we would all benefit if we just broke it into 2. So welcome back to this episode. We're excited you're here. If you haven't listened to the first parenting episode, go back 1 episode and you should be able to get that on any platform that you listen to. And we're going to dive in today. I want to recap last week. We, what did we talk about? We kind of...
I talked about some things I would never do as a parent, which I've already, I've already eaten my words
Put
on
your
with
foot in your mouth.
Babysitting my nieces. So they have eaten hot dogs and I have picked boogers out of their nostrils.
Did you use the nose Frida?
No, I used my pinky nail.
Pinky nail.
I had no resources. So if you missed last week's episode,
you have to go listen to it now.
Yeah. So we kind of landed on. It was funny. I remember laughing a lot last episode. We talked a lot about how many avenues of parenting there are.
Yeah.
I think the thing, one of the big takeaways I had was just the thought that if you're approaching parenting from a Christian's perspective, the Bible is not a parenting how-to book as far as like all the specifics, like, at what point, well, should you breastfeed? Should you bottle feed? Or should you
co-sleep?
Right. Should you read Baby Wise?
Geez.
I had to bring that up.
Controversial book.
Right. Or what age, do you give your children screens and how much time and all those kinds of things.
Yeah.
Those things aren't there, but there are some overarching principles and guidelines, but the really specifics are really up to us as parents, what we do.
We also talked a lot about how Facebook is also not a how-to guide for parenting, and just how many different opinions you get on all these different platforms, and that's one of the things that makes parenting so hard.
I know. Because from day one, actually even before day one, you are infiltrated with other people's advice that might have worked for them, but really we all have different family dynamics. We have different backgrounds. We have different experiences. We bring things into parenting that are not all the same. And we personally have to work through a lot. And then if you're parenting with a spouse, you throw in the communication hurdle, and you are not only learning to communicate between each other, but you're also learning to communicate with a baby or a toddler or a teenager that doesn't say any words, or a toddler that says a whole lot of words that might not make sense. and then a baby who communicates by crying. So it just adds to the mix, and it makes parenting hard.
Well, not only that, but you have children that are all different.
Right. Oh, yeah.
You know, I have 3, and all 3 of them were very, very different from the very beginning.
Did you parent them different?
Yeah,
because I have heard both philosophy. You know, some people will say, you know, you parent them differently because they're all 3 different. And some people are like, we did the same thing for all 3 kids. And I'm like, oh, no. I mean, man.
Yeah, it just depends. I mean, there were certain things that were the same just because it was just, this is the family environment or whatever.
Value or
but
something.
there, you know, it's like you might find that one child, when it comes to discipline, this is more effective than that. And, you know, that's what you go after.
Mm-hmm.
Those things are different because their personalities are different. God created them differently.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
You know, they're not cookie cutters, you know, even if they look alike. My oldest are my 2 boys, and they're 17 months apart. And when they were born, the pediatrician came to me and said, "You use the same mold." I mean, their baby pictures, that the ones they take in the hospital, the only way I know the difference is that one of them had more red hair than the other, but they are like almost identical. And it's like, oh my gosh. So, but their personalities are really different.
Yes.
Yeah. I was the toddler that would count down from 3 for my mom. And
Let me help you out, Mom.
Right. Meanwhile, you could find my older sister in the corner begging me to listen to my mom.
Oh my gosh.
We were completely different. And my mom would agree that she definitely parented us differently, mostly because everything that worked for my sister, no shot at working for me.
I know. Sometimes you just have to throw all your old tactics out the window and get creative.
Yep.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, very creative. I mean, like my youngest, his name is Phoenix, and it fits him perfectly because he's a fireball. I mean,
Yeah, he is.
and I was even watching old videos of him the other day, and he is the same. I mean, like it's funny how you can go back to even when they were toddlers or babies, and someone else was watching, and they said, "Oh my goodness, Jude is the same person. Like he's the curious question asker, and he's still like that today." And Phoenix was a little baby and like screaming his head off. And that, I mean, he still is like that. I mean, like loud and in your face and in times 10. So yeah, I had to get creative with Phoenix and poor Phoenix. 'Cause I mean, like my older kids like know Bible stories. 'Cause I'm like, I'm going to be the mom that tells my kids Bible stories from the very beginning. And then Phoenix, poor Phoenix, I'm like, this year, I mean, he's 6 this year. I'm like, why do we celebrate Christmas? And he was like, I don't know, Moses. And I'm like, oh geez. I've got a lot of work to do.
That's why he has older brothers.
Yeah.
They can help him too.
Yeah. Yeah. So you parent differently, and, I would like to say there's really not, just to put you at ease, there's really not a right and a wrong way to parent.
Yeah.
No matter what people tell you. Don't believe their crap, because it's hard enough to sift through what you believe in your values, because your values have a lot to do with how you parent.
Yeah.
And like Jana said, if you're parenting from a Christian perspective, then our go-to source would be the Bible. Mm-hmm. And so this episode, we kind of want to lay out, what does the Bible say about parenting, or how can we use our relationship with God to help us in our parenting journey? And I know Janice mentioned last week, she had a season of single parenting. And so I wanted her to, I know that there's a lot of listeners that we have that are single mothers and single parents. And I would just love for you to speak into your experience. What did God teach you through that? What kind of things did you experience? And what could you, in this season that you're on now, how could you look back and make of that time in your life?
Well, yeah, my kids were 14, 12, and 10 when their dad left us. And, when I got married the first time, obviously I got married in my mind for, this was permanent. And unfortunately, it wasn't a good marriage. There was some abuse and things like that. And so I was facing like adolescence, pre-puberty, all of that.
Yeah.
You know,
hard.
as a single parent, and I had never had it in my mind to ever be a single parent.
Mm-hmm.
And that was, it was a kind of a big shock because I wasn't prepared and realizing that I just remember feeling a weight on my shoulders of feeling like, oh my gosh, everything is up to me.
Yeah.
All the decisions, all the guidance, all the wisdom,
Wow.
whatever, providing everything is up to me. And I remember one day in particular, I have always journaled. So, I had my Bible and I was writing and I was crying and everything. And just basically telling the Lord, this is what I'm feeling like. I don't think I can bear this. It's so heavy. And I'm afraid I'm going to screw up my kids, and also being in a church at the time, especially, that it wasn't acceptable really to be a divorced woman. Obviously there must be something wrong with your walk with Jesus if this happened,
Wow.
that kind of stuff. So I was dealing with that too. And so as I'm journaling and crying out to God, and I'm just a mess, and I am not a pretty crier, I'm an ugly crier, I will claim it. And
It's the best.
but I really felt the Lord speaking to me and saying, it's not yours to carry.
Wow.
That's not a Janice-sized burden. That's a God-sized burden. And you need to cast your cares upon me and let me take that because, onto my part of the yoke, and then you just stay with me. It was, I think, the hardest time of my parenting. But there were also some really, really amazing things that I learned. And one of the biggest things I think I came out of that season was just how good and how faithful our God is.
Yeah.
When I was first thrust into single parenting, when my ex-husband left, I was not working, and he had basically cleaned out our bank accounts, and there were a lot of things that were way behind in bills and things like that. And so I was like, oh my gosh, what do I do? And one of the first things was, it was the beginning of the school year. And I had no money to buy my kids' shoes.
It's so expensive.
And supplies and all the other thing. And someone heard about it and they said, well, I know this church way far away and they've got a food pantry. They can get you some food and things like that. And I'm like, okay, well, that helps because it'll free up a little bit of money. So I remember driving there and getting a couple bags of groceries. And inside the bag was also an envelope that had money in it, and it was enough so that I could get shoes for the kids because, they got one pair of shoes a year, and it was like, I was at my boys were at that age where it's like, oh my gosh, they're growing by inches. You can watch it. You know? And so, they got that. But one of the things that was in there was this little plaque, like you could find at a Christian bookstore, real little, all that real country kind of thing, blue with the little flowers and all this kind of thing. But it said, God will provide.
Oh,
I still have that in my kitchen.
Do you still have it?
It is in my kitchen because every time I feel like God isn't going to provide, it reminds me that He is faithful, and I can think back on all the times during that time period that He was. Even the times when it's like, I don't have a husband. You have 2 teenage sons who are bigger than you. And actually, my daughter ended up being taller than me. And so, especially my sons, it's like, okay, they're bigger than me. They're stronger than me. They're whatever. And I don't have, a husband to back me up and say, you don't talk to your mom that way. You don't do this and that and the other. And that was a really hard thing. I remember with one of my sons one time, he was angry and he threw something at me as I was walking out the room and it hit the wall. And of course, I was pretty fiery at that point. And I turned around and I pointed my finger at him. I said, you ever do that to me again, I will call the police. And then I walked out. I'm like, oh my gosh, what did I just do? Because if I can't go back on that.
Yeah.
And he never did it again, which I was very thankful for. I was really thankful. But that's the thing. I think probably the biggest thing is that He is so good and He's so faithful. I believe that God has a special place in His heart for single moms.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Scripture talks all the time about, orphans and widows and things like that. And I think He does, because I saw over and over again that He would meet me at the place of my need. Not that it wasn't hard. It was horrible. I had, oh my gosh, I had a house foreclosed on. I had a car repossessed that I got back. I had electric shut off, gas shut off, water shut off, got it back on, more than once. All those kinds of things of just doing it. But I could see that he just worked with us. And even when my kids were in lots of trouble as far as, walking away from faith or just struggling with depression or doing whatever, he just kept working it out. And I can now, those years are past, I can see that. So I think that's one of the biggest things, but it is a lonely time. Single parenting is lonely.
It is.
And I was fortunate to have some other women around me that I'm still friends with to this day that are like sisters. And that was really important, I think, as a single mom, to have community.
Yeah.
What is one thing that you could maybe speak into? You said you have two boys, two older boys. What kind of things were you doing to help them grow in who God designed them to be in their manhood? And what kind of prayers were you praying for them? And, did you see, you said you were in a church. I would imagine, and I would hope that like men would come alongside to help with those guys. Did you see that?
I would pray that God would put godly men in their lives. And the church that I was at the time, there were some youth leaders, guys that did that. And sometimes I had to go and say, hey, I need you to spend some time with my son. They need that. They need to see that, I need you to come over and teach my son how to shave.
Yeah.
I can't do that. Yeah. Things like that.
Yeah.
And
I love that you asked. It was probably harder. It was probably hard to ask.
It was hard to ask because in your mind you wish like, can anybody see me? Because I think with single parenting as a mom, sometimes you can feel invisible. And in many ways, the church I was in at the time, they kind of wanted you to sort of be invisible because they didn't quite know what to do with the fact that you weren't married.
Yeah.
But I struggled with that, just feeling like nobody sees how hard this is. But there were men that came alongside me, but then I had to ask sometimes too. And the other prayer was that I used to pray that I knew that I'm working full time, I can't be home when my kids come home from school, I don't know what's going on. And I just said, okay, Lord, if they're doing something they're not supposed to be doing, just make sure they get caught before they get hurt.
Yeah.
And I saw that happen a number of times, and they would say, I know, Mom. You've been praying that. But I think that's, I knew that I couldn't be both mom and dad. There were things about it that I could, but they needed men.
Yep.
They needed men, and God did provide that in many ways.
Yeah.
So
I think it's cool. One of the promises that you clung to was that He will provide. And you can probably sit here today and look back and remember and know that He has provided every step of the way.
Yeah, and it's provision. I think when we say the word provision, I think many times what comes to our mind is money,
Materials,
and finances, and material things, and there was that, like people coming over and saying, "Hey, I'm going to take your van out and get it washed for you, and come back with a full tank of gas," things like that. But it was provision in other ways, provision emotionally and support, and can I come over and work on your house and do this, or those kinds of things. There was lots of different kinds of provision that He provides in all of those ways, and not just necessarily finances.
Yeah. I think a lot of times too, I come from divorced parents, and I think one thing that you mentioned, Janice, was that you couldn't be mom and dad, but you obviously longed for that for your kids. And one thing that God has provided for me personally, and that I know my parents really provided for me, was feeling like I always had two parents, you know? And so my Heavenly Father has shown me love and grace and mercy, and has been that parental figure constantly and consistently. And so I think that one of those desires, just for your kids to always feel like they have the support of parents, that's one thing that God promises to us.
Mm-hmm.
He's always going to be that parent, maybe not earthly, but just knowing that has brought me a lot of comfort coming from divorced parents. And that's something that, you know, we can teach our kids to cling to.
Yeah.
Because I've learned a lot from my parents' divorce. So from their mishap or their mistake, I've still gotten a lot of valuable life insights from.
Mm-hmm.
Like what? What
So,
something comes to your mind?
One thing that I know that my mom especially worried about throughout their divorce was that my sister and I wouldn't really know what to look for in a marriage. Because your parents are that example for you.
Yeah.
And they're the example of how to show love to a spouse and how to raise kids together and how to run a household. And one thing that is comforting to my parents, and I don't know if I've ever said the words directly to my mom, but I'll tell her before she listens to this podcast. But even though she saw her divorce as like a stain on the carpet, like Janice, you mentioned that the church viewed you that way, I saw it as, what can I do better for my marriage and for my spouse and for my kids? And so from that, you just open up a whole wide array of communication, and you can learn a lot from even divorced parents. And so that's something that I wouldn't have the intentionality with my future spouse that I do now if my parents hadn't gotten divorced.
Yeah.
And so a lot of things that I talked to Jordan about and that I looked for in the dating process with Jordan stemmed from that divorce.
Yeah, I think that's encouraging to people listening who have maybe young kids who have witnessed their parents go through divorce.
Yeah.
And it can be easy to get sucked into a tunnel of like, what good could ever come out of this?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think one of the first pieces of advice that I got when I was going through the divorce process is someone said to me, who was a single mom, she said, don't ever forget that he will always be your kid's dad.
Yeah.
And, you know, he will no longer be your husband, but he will always be their dad. So be careful about what you say. And so I took that to heart and determined that in front of them, I was never going to, you know, badmouth him or, you know, tear him down or, you know, do that and then say you're just like your dad, you know, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Because they're in their mind, it's like, well, he's my dad, and so he's like part of me. So if he's that way, then I guess there's something wrong with me.
Yeah.
And many times it was really difficult not to do that, but I'm glad that I did, because it made space for when they were older to be able to look back and look at their relationship with him and just make their own conclusions
good.
and decisions and expectations of him and all of those things, and really truly own that relationship rather than have it tainted by, you know, like loyalty to mom or, you know, or whatever, choosing sides, because I never wanted them to feel like they had to choose between us, you know, choose sides.
Yeah.
And I mean, I am 100% positive that God honored your tongue in that. And that's such wisdom, I think, for, you know, people who are walking through a situation in divorce, is that, I mean, the tongue is a powerful thing. And for you to have enough patience and endurance, because I'm sure in the moment when you are livid about choices that your ex, you know, husband makes, or the way he's, you know, parenting differently than you might have parented, or, you know, whatever, it's just, it allows the space for God to work instead of tainting, like you said, their view of their other parent.
Yeah.
So important.
I think, and also too, then if your ex-spouse remarries, then you deal with all that too. And he did actually he actually remarried really quickly after our divorce was final. And I remember, I think my kids had gone down for a weekend or something, and I heard one of them talking to someone and talking about their stepmom. And part of me just like went right through the roof.
Oh, wow.
Because in my mind, it's like, you have a mom.
Yeah.
You do not need a stepmom. You know, I was like, explosion, steam
Fire
coming out of my ears.
Yeah.
I'm like, that's for somebody who just, whose mom has disappeared. You have a mother right here. And I had to get over that and realize that it's almost like sometimes I just feel like the Lord just kind of just says, calm down, girl. It's okay. We got this taken care of in the long term, because I think that's the hardest thing, even about any kind of parenting, is that it's a long-term thing.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
You may see some things like immediately, but so much of what you're doing, you're just sowing seeds into your kids that you aren't going to see sprout up or do anything, maybe for years and maybe until they're adults. And I think that that's the same thing with that. It was like, okay, yes, stepmom, whatever, just let it go. This is a long-term thing. They know who you are, and all of that. But yeah, it's hard.
When you're talking about sowing seeds, that made me think of, I remember like having very little kids and feeling like I was drowning in just diapers and bottles and spit up and car seats and lugging them out in the cold and grocery shopping and screaming and tantrums in the grocery store. And maybe some of you listening are right there right now. But I do remember, I want to like speak into a little bit about just like the ministry of motherhood. 'Cause you were talking about sowing seeds, and I really do believe that as a parent, our kids are our ministry. Our family is our ministry. And I think of the parable of the sower that's found in the Gospels, and how the seeds, they're falling on, rocky ground. So they kind of take root really quick, and there's nothing really to hold on to. So the plant falls away. And then the thorny ground, where they get taken over by the world's culture and cares and worries. And then also one that doesn't even permeate into the soil, and it gets picked up by birds. The truth, like in this parable, the seeds can be seen as truth. And so when we're sowing the seeds of truth about who God is into our children's lives, I was reminded one day, and challenged as I read that passage, because I saw the soil. I think that parable, the cool thing about parables, we know this, is that they can mean several different things. I mean, it's like an onion. There's a lot of layers and meanings, and things that can represent things and stories and all that. And Jesus spoke those intentionally for those of us who want to dig and want to learn, that we're going to uncover those truths. But I do remember one day reading that and being challenged, because I saw the soil as not only my heart, but what kind of soil I was providing for my household. And as my job as a mother, and at the time I was a stay-at-home mom, so I was there 24/7 with them. I was there through the night, through the day. I remember sometimes wondering when the next conversation I would have with an adult besides my husband when he came home. And like interpreting baby talk, thinking like, picoprit was one of Jude's words one time. And he said it meant like fast. And it's funny because he would use that word and I would just translate. When he was talking to like grown-ups or something, I'm like, that means fast. So I was just having, hundreds of these little conversations and just wondering what, and and so I do remember thinking, what kind of soil am I cultivating in my home? And I was challenged to cultivate a soil that was rich and it was deep and it was fortified with nutrients. And I asked myself, what does it look like to cultivate that in my home. And, I mean, just like as a resource drop, I mean, you guys throw out resources as well. Our kids ministry, our next gen ministry does an online lab on parenting, and it's the parenting lab, and you can check it out. But the curriculum that they use is called ParentQ.
Yeah.
It is amazing. It's very practical. It's very awesome. But they have this part that really stuck out to me. They talked about when your kids are this age to this age, this is the question that they're asking. And I remember the baby phase is like they're asking, am I safe? Mm-hmm. And then they get into the toddler and they're like, am I heard? And then another phase they're asking, am I seen? And another phase they're asking like, can I trust you? So they go on and on like with different phases, and they're relatively small phases. So, I mean, like there's a wide variety of different questions that our kids are asking. And I remember thinking that as I was trying to figure out how to cultivate my home for a space where my kids, A, felt safe, and B, would learn the Word of God. And that's not everybody's, that's not everybody's goal, I think, with motherhood. But that's just what I remember God kind of laying on my heart is, I mean, like, are they safe? Are they having fun? And are they learning about God? So, like, I just remember weaving in and out all day long, just different scriptures or Bible stories or truths, or, I mean, like, literally, like, driving down the road, who made the clouds? Or who made you? Or who made, whatever. And, I'm not through with parenting, and I never will be through with parenting, but I think I can see some of those seeds. And I didn't see them for a really long time, but I think in their ages of 6, 9, and 11, I'm starting to see some of those things.
Yeah. I think, when we are parents, just as we are, as if we are Jesus followers, we're supposed to be reflecting who he is, his characteristics, his attributes. And it's so important to do that with our kids, to, when you screw up, to go to them and saying,
that's so huge.
Please forgive me, and this is why, to demonstrate that, to value and really listen. When my boys were, 11, 10, 11, 12, that kind of thing, one of the things was playing video games. And I would just sit and watch them. And then when they wanted to sit down and go through all the mind-numbing details.
Oh my gosh, I'm right there right now. What piece of advice do you have for me right now?
I learned to listen because I thought, if I listen to them now and let them know that I'm really listening, then in a couple years, when they're teenagers and they really run into some life questions and things, they'll know that I'll listen.
Wow, that's so good.
And it was...
I can't help but think that the mind-numbing details that Jude has told me about Minecraft recently. I'm like, what? What? The what? The piston door what?
Yes, I know. And so, I mean, to this day, it's... My oldest son will... If he gets off on some video game, he will still do that. And I'm like... That's right. Okay, I can do this,
gosh.
And now he has sons that are doing the same thing, so it's great. So, but it's those are the things our Heavenly Father, like you were talking about, Megan, listens to us.
Yes. Yeah. That is so
and
good.
Though we can't do it perfectly, the more we can, the more that our kids then know that, well, gosh, if my mom or my dad or whoever will listen to me, then God the Father is going to hear me and listen to me. Yeah. He's going to care about the little things in my life, when they come home from school, and the things that are so huge in their life at that moment that, you may be dealing with, oh man, how am I going to pay the electric bill? Or this, I have a parent that's ill, or, all of those things that we think of as big adult problems. Yeah. That problem to them feels just as huge. Yeah. Mm-hmm. And when you take that time to sit down and talk or listen, it makes that difference because that's what God does to us.
Yeah, that's so good.
I think there is I don't even have kids yet. And I already feel, walking into a season of getting married, making future life decisions, I already feel almost a pressure to like have it figured out and at least put off a front.
Yeah.
There's at least a front there where I feel like a desire is to just show your kids that you know what you're doing and you have it all together.
Oh, man.
And sometimes I think that, Janice, like what you said about going to them and opening that door of communication and saying, I was wrong here and I want to talk to you about it and I'm sorry and let's figure out how we can do it better next time. Mm-hmm. It's just the pressure to put up that front is so discouraging when it comes to also wanting to just be real with your kids and let them in on your parenting and not just put up this facade that you know exactly what you're doing and that you can do no wrong. Because I think that, like I learned through my parents' divorce, a lot of valuable things I've learned have come from mistakes and just being able to talk to them about it. And so I think that's so important, is to just not focus as much on what your kids are seeing about the front you're putting up, but also allowing them to open their eyes to who you are and let them see God shine through you.
Yeah. Well, and that just like you were talking about reflecting, that just reflects repentance.
Yeah.
And which I think is so important, because I really believe that as we are just walking this earth, Jesus's mission for us and our purpose is to refine us and to make us look more like him. And I think I would beg to say that parenting is probably the most sanctifying process in my life.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, sanctifying meaning transforming,
Yes.
like, and self-reflect. I mean, so many different things that I've learned and that I've seen in myself that I don't desire and I don't want. And I think that asking God to refine me through the process, I mean, like, that's what I mean when I'm saying sanctification.
I agree. I also know that having 3 kids that were teenagers at the same time, my children are very close in age, and as a single parent, that is where the roots of my prayer life came from.
Yeah, you are a prayer warrior too.
It was like, we all 4 of us are not going to live through this season.
Yeah.
If mom doesn't pray right now, because that's all you have, and you know that's it. And I'm glad that my kids knew that I prayed for them.
Yeah.
And,
well, and
I prayed
those
for
are also
myself.
seeds too. Yeah. Pray for yourself.
Because, and I like the analogy or the statement about the sanctification process. Because, when you're handed that baby at first, it's like you're overwhelmed. You've got all the hormones going anyways, but you have overwhelmed with this amount of love. And I would die right this second for this child. And then give it a little bit of time. And you're just like, why did I do this to myself?
My mom, she told me that when I was around 3, so probably my 2s and 3s, she said that she would go to bed crying, knowing that at sunrise she would have to see me again.
Oh my gosh, just keeping it real.
Today, I can look at everything that I experienced with my mom, and from her, I think that I get my patience directly from her. And I think I mentioned last week, I had my terrible 2s were actually more like terrible 1.5 to 10. But my mom she is like the poster child for patience with me. And that's something that I didn't really notice at the time, obviously, as a screaming 6-7-year-old, but now I can really attribute that to her. And that's just from watching her be.
Well, I think a note on patience, and probably one of the things that I feel like I've learned over the past, I guess, like 3 years, is that I would get so hot and fiery and bothered and like instances, like when they were just driving me crazy or getting on my last nerve or not listening or not obeying. And I read a book called Parenting. That's an original title. Parenting by Paul David Tripp. And I would recommend anybody read it. It's not so much practical as it is mindset shift. We actually had this resource at our Inspired 2021 conference. And it really encouraged me to switch from the here and now to the long game. I mean, like you mentioned that at the very beginning, like parenting is it's a marathon.
Yes.
And I found that when I was just in that moment, I wanted to explode. That it was a long game. It was a long run.
Yeah.
And so how am I disciplining? How am I correcting? How am I guiding that is going to get me to where I want in the long run? Because if I did what I was actually feeling in the moment, and that's not saying I don't do that, because I do, that I just realized that I am having those conversations a lot more often of like, I'm sorry that I lost my temper, and do you forgive me? And but I think that it's just it's an endurance race.
Yeah.
Patience is
and
a
I think
big
too,
deal in parenting.
I think when your children get to, especially like teenage years, it's the thought is pick your battles. What is really important and what really isn't. You know, what's really essential and what isn't essential.
Yes.
You know, maybe
and you talked about that last.
based in your home rules. You know, things like that, and making those choices are really, I think, are really important too. That's part of the long game.
Yeah.
And I know I found that to be true. And there were a lot of things I look back now, you know, now that my kids are adults and think, and this is part of the problem, I think, of parenting, is you go back and it's like, man, I wish I had done that different. Or I wish I hadn't done that. Or I wish I had said this instead of that. Or why in the world did I ever think that was such a big deal? And you can pray and just say, Lord, whatever I did wrong, could you correct it and fix it so that it doesn't create this big, huge problem in their lives? And I think that is a very reasonable prayer.
Yes.
Yeah. You know.
Well, I mean, I think that God, through our parenting, really, if we allow Him and if we open ourselves up to it, I think that He really paves the way to show redemption, restoration, and renewal. And I mean, like, restore, I just think, like you just said, there's so many different things. I can live in regret and I can dwell on the things that I wish I would have done differently. But what I do know is the promise of God is that He will restore. I mean, that is from the beginning of the Bible in Genesis to the end in Revelation. That is the purpose, is to restore what is broken.
Yeah. And also keeping the door open to your children so that when they do mess up, that they don't run and hide.
Yeah.
But they know that they can still come to you and you can work it out rather than, hammer them with something. Yeah. It's like there's consequences, but we're going to get through this. We're going to get through this together. We're going to work this out, whatever. Here's the consequences that are going to have to be dealt with. But still, you're not loved less. There's nothing wrong with you. All of those kinds of things that really in our culture can really come down on someone if they make a mistake. Yeah. So if anything, like you were talking about children needing to feel safe, I think that's lifelong. They need to know that you are their safe person.
Yeah. Well, as we kind of wrap this up and close, do either one of you have any kind of final thoughts or encouragement toward those who are, I mean, we talked about a lot of different phases. Maybe you're listening and you've got either your earbuds in or listening to it on a speaker at home while you have crying babies in the background or they're hungry for dinner, or it's the witching hour and they're not doing what you think they should be doing. Or maybe you're a listener that is desperate for answers and how to lead a wayward teenager, and wanting them to follow Jesus, or at least follow the rules and the layouts and the values that you've set up for your family. What can you say to, not even having kids, what can you say to a mom that might be in that situation right now? And then you, Janice.
So I think that a lot of what I've learned about how I'm a product of my parenting, of the parenting I was raised in, I would say that your mistakes can be very valuable to your children. I would say that just as you don't think of your children any less for messing up, you can expect the same from them.
Mm-hmm.
So I think that just opening that door of communication that we've talked about, like, hey, I was wrong here and I'm sorry. I think that you can really teach your children that relationship that we get, that we have with our Heavenly Father of, I don't think any less of you, and I'm still going to love you the same. You can expect that from your children too.
Yeah.
And
that's a lot of trust building.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And I think just going back to the endurance part of it, I know my mom, she would attest to, I'm sure she found herself in a long season of just like, why? Like, I specifically remember, because she'll never let me forget, but I was a huge germaphobe growing up, like to the point where I just had this overwhelming fear that when I wiped my butt, my like thumb would poke through and I would like make contact with my butt. Okay. So I refused.
How long did she wipe you?
11 years.
Oh my gosh. Are you kidding?
11 years of my life, my mom wiped my butt.
Oh
because
my gosh. That is love.
And I can't I can't imagine what was going through her mind. I can't imagine her, like, imagine me being 6 years old and her being like, okay, I think tomorrow might be the last time, and then having another 5 years.
Yeah.
Having another 5 years.
I have no words. I can't even like apologize to her. Like, that's not even like sufficient. But
the question is, will you wipe your child's bottom until they're 11?
No nose Fritas, no butt wiping. But I will say that she stuck through it, and I learned a lot from it.
Yeah.
So, despite wiping butts for way longer than she ever anticipated, which now she tells me that she'll get me back someday. So I'll be her caretaker. Yeah. I've already signed myself up. So I would just say, in times like that, when you might be sitting down thinking, I really hope that tomorrow is the last time I have to experience this with my child. And if it continues for 5 more years, just know that there's light at the end.
Mm-hmm. That's good. I think the thing I would share is that, especially the single moms, you're probably doing a whole lot better than you think you are.
Yes. Thank you for saying that.
And I'd say that to all moms.
Yes.
You are most probably doing far better than you think you are.
Yes.
I think motherhood is a really guilty profession in many ways.
Ooh, yeah.
I'll do things even now with my adult kids, and I'll text them and, hashtag mom guilt, mom fail. Yeah. And all that. And also, if you are feeling just so super overwhelmed, please ask for help.
Yes.
Yeah.
And, whether that's going to a counselor, to have that adult conversation and being able to vent and be able to have someone who's like on the outside looking in, be able to give you some tools to, to cope with things. Or it's finding, a group of single moms or moms that you can just spend time with that will lift you up and pray for you. Yeah. Find a good church that you can be in that values you for who you are. Those are all things that for myself were so, and still are, just so integral to my emotional health, my spiritual health, my, my mental health, everything. So those are the things that I would encourage.
Yeah, that's good. I think I would finish out by saying I remember early on just reading a verse, and I think it's, oh, great. Now I'm not going to remember. 1 Peter, maybe? Maybe not at all. I don't know. I need to go look it up. But basically, that God has equipped me with everything I need pertaining to life and godliness.
Yeah.
What is that? Do you know?
I think it is in 1 Peter.
Equipping me with everything. I remember reading that like when Jude was probably 2 weeks old and thinking, okay, it's just there. I can do this.
Mm-hmm.
And so if I could sit with you face to face with tears in my eyes, I would say that God has equipped you with everything that you need in order to parent your child.
Yeah,
that's
and
right.
along with that God has specifically designed you to be the parent of your child.
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes I think, where did these kids come from? Because they don't get that gene from me. Let me just encourage you that God has specifically ordained you and all of who you are to parent all of who they are. And then one more, that God has planted a deep-seated purpose in you and your child, and he has ordained it so that you figure it out together.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Together.
Yeah.
I think that, that goes along back to the communication thing, and personality thing. Each one of them is different in their personalities and their communication styles. And I know God has planted a purpose in me to be a mother. And I know that I am figuring out that purpose as well as my kids. And we're bringing out the best in each other as we go along, and we do it with Christ at the center.
That's right.
So
absolutely.
Be encouraged. It's not for the faint of heart. Parenting is not for the faint of heart. And, if you have a friend, like a mom friend that just needs to hear an encouraging word, I would encourage you to share this podcast with them.
Yep.
And, and just like Jana said, if you need help, ask.
That's right.
Find a trusted friend. If you don't have a trusted friend and you are in the local Canal, Winchester area, feel free to come to X Church. There are plenty of moms here and parents here who are figuring it out. Yes. And we have enough grace to go around and just to help you on your parenting journey. So we love you guys. Thanks for tuning in.
Thanks so much for listening. Our hope is that everyone who hears these episodes, near or far, would know that the invitation at our table is always open. You might not be sitting at this table, but our desire is that you would join in on these conversations. So if you were inspired by today's talks, send us an email at inspired@thex.church. We'd love to hear your thoughts, stories, and questions. And as always, don't forget to rate and review wherever you listen to podcasts.